Hello. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati. My name is Patty Kelly, and I will be your worship leader this morning. We're happy to have all of you here, both sitting in front of me and also online. At First Church, you can be yourself. You can bring your questions and your convictions, and you will find kindred spirits who covenant to be a beloved community based on our shared values. We're constantly striving, certainly not perfectly, to live out those values, including wrestling with some uncomfortable truths, such as the knowledge that we occupy land that is the ancestral home of the Adena and Hopewell cultures and the Miamia and Shawnee peoples. If you would like to know more about our church or about the Unitarian Universalist faith, please contact us by emailing member-care@firstuu.com. Our congregation wants to make things as welcoming and comfortable for you as possible, so we have a variety of accommodations that are listed in your order of service, and they're also on signs all around the building. And if you ever have any questions, please just ask an usher at the back of the sanctuary. The flowers today are given by A.J. Combs and Kyle Lewis, and they are dedicated to students, teachers, and staff returning to school this week and hoping for a safe and productive school year. And AJ told me that the little things you may not be able to see too well that are surrounding the vase are rings that the kids going back to school can take with them after the service, which is very nice. Before we begin our service today, please rise and greet your neighbor, but hey, we're going to do something different first. As soon as you rise, we are going to wave to the people at home. Then you can say hi to people, and I'll bring you back by ringing the singing bowl. I know, it's so exciting to be all back together. And as Angela Pruitt lights our chalice today, I'm going to share with you some wisdom from Henry Nouwen from his book, Life of the Beloved. He wrote this book for a dear friend, but he published it, and his words have inspired many people. All I want to say to you is, you are the beloved. And all I hope is that you can hear these words as spoken to you with all the tenderness and force that love can hold. My only desire is to make these words reverberate in every corner of your being. You are the beloved. The greatest gift my friendship can give you is the gift of your belovedness. I can give that gift only insofar as I have claimed it for myself. Isn't that what friendship is all about? Giving to each other the gift of our belovedness?
Well, good morning, everybody. So I'm introducing the first hymn this morning because I'm pushing our theological envelope. It's a very Christian hymn. And a couple of people said to me, "There's a balm in Gilead? He died for our sins?" Well, some Unitarian Universalists hold to that theology. I know the vast majority of us don't. So I wanted to take a moment and point out, because I've been in congregations before where people would, and it might be true here, certain people would refuse to sing certain words in a hymn because they didn't agree with the theology of the hymn. I hope y'all don't do that here. But in the event that you do, I don't want a pregnant pause in the middle of the hymn. So I want to just encourage you all to think about this hymn beyond its theological literacy. I like to translate theological statements that I don't agree with into metaphors that I do agree with. And so here's an example of how that might work. You may not hold to the theology of this hymn, but this is what I do with the hymn and why I love it so much, apart from the fact that it is artistically beautiful. There is a balm in Gilead. Now you can take that literally, or you can take it metaphorically. And here's how I tend to take it. I am Gilead. Metaphorically, I am Gilead. And there is a balm in Gilead that heals the scoundrel's soul. Deep within inside each of us, there is a place untouched by world challenges. A place where we are the best selves we aspire to be all the time, and that is the balm inside this Gilead. Or you can take the world to be Gilead, and first you is the balm inside Gilead. So I invite you to sing this hymn, translate it as necessary, use one of those metaphors, use one of your own if you need to, and if you would, rise as you are able.
once upon a time, upon a hill, there was a forest. Wait a minute. Can I have some volunteers here who are willing to be trees in our forest? Reverend Alex, can I call you forward?
You may call me forward.
All right.
I would love to be a tree.
Wonderful. Who wants to be a tree with him? Come on. All right. Come forward. Yes, wonderful. Come up. Yes, be our forest.
You gotta go like this?
Yes. Wonderful. All right. As I was saying, once upon a time, upon a hill, there was a forest. However, over the years, the forest thinned. First, you want to be a tree too? All right. First, the woodcutters came, and they chopped down the trees that they thought would make good, long boards. You're chopped. You're chopped. Thank you. Then the loggers came, and they chopped down any tree they thought would have a good smell and burn bright. You're chopped. You're chopped. And finally, the carvers. And they came and they chopped down any tree that they thought would have nice, fine grain where they could carve intricate patterns. You're chopped. Until finally, all that was left on that hill was one gnarled tree. Now, over the years, that hill became a gathering spot. Under that tree, our children played. And in the evening, the elders in the village came and they sat beneath its branches. One evening, one of the elders wondered, what's the use of being useless? To which another elder replied, well, just look at this tree here. It wasn't good enough to create long boards for construction. It wasn't good enough to be used in fire. It wasn't good enough to carve, but here it is, providing shade and comfort during the day and these evenings. And that is how the story today ends. But I wonder what you think the most important part of this story is. And you can think about that for the rest of the morning. Woo! You can think about that for the rest of the morning. Can we get a round of applause for our trees? And children, will you join me out by the front doors? We're going to go to the playground.
Part of being a beloved community is sharing our joys and concerns with each other. We do this in a literal way by giving you the option to fill out the form in your order of service, and in that you can indicate if you would like to have this concern shared in the email that goes around called the Circle of Friends among our members, or if you'd like to put it in the newsletter, or if you'd like to have contact with our resident chaplain, Reverend Mary Tarbell Green, or with our new minister, Alex. please indicate this, and you can drop that in the offering bowl or on the desk as you leave the ceremony. But right now, we're going to engage in our ritual of stones and water. The water before me represents the love of our community. We drop a stone in the water to seek the softening of our sorrows and the amplification of our joys. All the individual joys and sorrows come together in one bowl of water so that they can be symbolically shared and borne by our community. We invite you now to come forward, if you wish, up the side aisles and back down through the center. Please join us. I'll now drop 3 more stones into the water of community. One is for the joys and sorrows outside these walls that go unmentioned. The second stone is for those joys and sorrows that go unspoken, but that we have closely guarded in our hearts. And last, a stone for the brokenness in our world as we search for ways to be agents of wholeness by placing ourselves in the breach. And now on to our offering. Our August Share the Plate offering is for our church's work at South Avondale Elementary School. The students and staff at South Avondale need our support more than ever as their needs outstrip available resources. Our Share the Plate proceeds will go towards educational supplies and library books for the students of South Avondale. And be sure to be here on August 27th when we will hear from one of the teachers at the school. If you're inspired to donate to South Avondale or to support the work of First Church, there are several methods of giving. These are now listed in your order of service, and for folks watching online, there are links in the description of today's service on the YouTube channel. Just click on More after the end of the sermon description. That way that you can get straight there. If you're visiting with us for the first time, please let the plate pass you by. We are just glad you're here.
So our reading this morning comes from J.D. Salinger's short story, Teddy. How many people here have heard of J.D. Salinger's story, Teddy? Not many folks. So I'm going to be introducing Teddy to you this morning, which is my favorite Salinger story. And the story is about a 10-year-old boy from America who is the reincarnation of, I wouldn't say an enlightened yogi, but a person who was making great progress on the path to enlightenment in India at the time. And Teddy doesn't attain enlightenment because, in Teddy's words, he met a woman. And that took his attention away from his enlightenment goals and put them on more earthly matters, shall we say. And in the book, Teddy has just gone to Europe to meet with some scholars because they've heard about his reputation, his great yogic abilities that he has, and they want to study Teddy. So he goes across the sea and he meets with them. And on the way back, he's on a cruise line. And he's on top of the deck on the cruise line sitting down with a young man named Nicholson who has heard of Teddy but has never met Teddy. So this picks up in the middle of their conversation. But I could get out of the finite dimensions fairly often when I was 4, Teddy said as an afterthought. Not continuously or anything, but fairly often. Nicholson nodded. You did? He said. You could? Yes, Teddy said. That was on the tape. Or maybe it was on the one I made last April. I'm not sure. Nicholson took out his cigarettes again, but without taking his eyes off of Teddy, said, How does one get out of the finite dimensions? And he gave a short laugh. I mean, to begin very basically, said Nicholson, a block of wood is just a block of wood, for example. It has length, width. It hasn't. That's where you're wrong, said Teddy. Everybody just thinks things keep stopping off somewhere. They don't. That's what I was trying to tell Professor Pete. He shifted in his seat and took out an eyesore of a handkerchief, a gray, wadded entity, and he blew his nose and continued. The reason things seem to stop off somewhere is because that's the only way most people know how to look at things. But that doesn't mean that things actually stop off somewhere. He put away his handkerchief and he looked at Nicholson. Hold up your arm for a second, he said. My arm? Why? Said Nicholson. Just do it, said Teddy. Just do it for a second. Nicholson raised his forearm an inch or two above the level of his armrest. This one? Asked Nicholson. Teddy nodded. What do you call that thing there? What do you mean, what do you call it? It's my arm. It's an arm, said Nicholson. How do you know it's an arm? Teddy asked. You know it's called an arm, but how do you know it actually is an arm? Do you have any proof that it's an arm? Nicholson took a cigarette out of his pack and lit it. I think that smacks of the worst kind of sophistry, frankly, he said, exhaling smoke. It's an arm, for heaven's sake, because it's an arm. In the first place, it is to have a name to distinguish it from other objects. I mean, you can't simply... You're just being logical, said Teddy. I'm just being what? Said Nicholson, a little annoyed at the suggestion. Logical, said Teddy. You're just giving me a regular, intelligent answer. I was trying to help you. You asked me how I get out of the finite dimensions when I feel like it. I certainly don't use logic when I do it. Logic's the first thing you have to get rid of. Nicholson removed a flake of tobacco from his tongue with his fingers. Teddy continued, You know Adam. Do I know who? Adam, in the Bible, said Teddy. Nicholson smiled. Well, not personally, he said dryly. Teddy hesitated. Now look, don't be angry at me. You asked me a question, and I'm not angry at you, for heaven's sake, said Nicholson. Okay, Teddy said. He was sitting back in his chair, but his head was turned toward Nicholson. And Teddy said, "You know that apple Adam ate in the Garden of Eden, referred to in the Bible?" he asked. "You know what was in that apple?" asked Teddy. Logic. Logic and all that intellectual stuff. That's what was in that apple. "So this is my point," he continued. "What you have to do is vomit it up if you want to see things like they really are. I mean, if you vomit it up, then you won't have any more trouble with blocks of wood and stuff. You won't see everything stopping off somewhere all the time. And you'll know what your arm really is, if you're really interested. Do you know what I mean? Do you follow me?" said Teddy. "I follow you," said Nicholson rather shortly. "Trouble is," Teddy said, "most people don't want to see things the way they are. They don't even want to stop getting born and dying all the time. They just want new bodies all the time instead of stopping and staying with God where it's really neat," he reflected. And he looked about the deck and he said to Nicholson, "I've never seen so many apple eaters in one place before." Our next hymn is number 95, "There is More Love Somewhere." Please rise as you are able. Over the course of time, you're going to hear me talk about the Christian House of Prayer. And the Christian House of Prayer was my first church experience when I was about 19 years old. And the Christian House of Prayer was a breakaway group from the Pentecostal movement. And they saw themselves as very liberal because they allowed women to cut their hair. And they allowed women to wear jeans to church. It's a very edgy group. And Brother George was very fond of talking about the unity of God. He denied the Trinity of God. And sometimes on Sunday morning, Brother George would bring his trumpet, and his wife, Sister Carol, played the piano. And he would get up and he would say, you know what? Today, we're just going to sing. And we would sing for 2 hours. And that would be Sunday morning. And listening to you all sing that song made me say, what if we just kept singing this morning like Brother George and Sister Carol? But I know my audience, you need something to take away, so something mental to chew on this afternoon, so I'll continue with the sermon. I got lots of wonderful stories about the Christian House of Prayer. All right, so I'm in the middle of a 3-part sermon series, and I said I am slow rolling the message over last week, this week, and then I'll be back in the pulpit on the 27th of August. So last week, I got to do a recap, right? Because if somebody missed it, you got to know a little bit about what happened last week to understand this week. So last week, I explained to you all why the term scoundrel is a term of endearment to me. And I was very impressed. How many of you this week called me a scoundrel? You got the message. It's a term of endearment because it is a reminder to go easy on myself and to go easy on others. And it's also a reminder of the purpose of the spiritual life, which is really what these 3 sermons are about. And so to explain the term scoundrel, I threw in some evolutionary psychology. And many of you talked to me about evolutionary psychology this week. I got to be careful what I say to you all. So I said, according to evolutionary psychology, that specifically we are the result of the evolutionary agenda. And the evolutionary agenda is to replicate the gene pool. We want to make carbon copies of ourselves. And to do that, the gene pool must be replicated. And the gene pool's, its agenda is supported by and even driven by the instinctual life, our instinctual nature. And I also said that the people in our lives influence our development as well. Our parents, our siblings, our friends, our peer group, society at large all have influences on us as we grow into life and try to achieve the evolutionary agenda. So those 2 things combined, the evolutionary agenda and the influence of people on our lives that help shape our character, end up making us conditioned beings. By the time we reach early adulthood, we become very predictable. We have mental habits, we have emotional habits, we have bodily habits. And this is a very strong, powerful conditioning, and it's what drives us through life as we passively acquiesce to our conditioned self. Right? Do you all remember this from last week, those of you who were here? All right, so now I get to test you. Regarding our conditioning, I said, there's good news. And the good news is, you're not to blame for being the scoundrel you are. Because all of that happened before you reached a point in life where you were an autonomous individual who could actually begin to control the direction of your life. By the time you reach that point in life, you are conditioned. So you're not to blame. That's why being a scoundrel is a term of endearment. It's a way of saying, I know we're not perfect. And because of that, we should love each other anyway, because it's nobody's fault. Right? Amen. All right. I'll take amens, by the way. And then I said, there's also bad news. And the bad news is? Ooh, you got that one. Once you know you're a scoundrel, then you're responsible for what you become from that moment forward. And in the second half of the sermon, I shared the story of Jesus and the adulteress to make this point. And I was incredibly impressed how many of you know your Bible. Said otherwise, though, I said the point of the spiritual life is the transformation of being. The point of the spiritual life isn't to affirm some theological belief statement by which you get the metaphysical keys to heaven and therefore are able to enter heaven upon your death. That's not the point of the spiritual life. The point of the spiritual life is the transformation of being. To become better scoundrels tomorrow than we find ourselves to be today. To become, as I said last week, the person you want to be before you die. Let's get on with being our best selves now so we can write out the rest of our lives as our best selves. And the spiritual life and the spiritual traditions that support the spiritual life, that's the agenda of many of them. And I think it ought to be the agenda of being a Unitarian Universalist. I think Unitarian Universalism is an opportunity for that transformation of being. And it's necessary work we must do in order to be comfortable living in our own skins in the world. This is one of my mantras I repeat a fair amount. There are very few facts about life, and everything else is happenstance and luck. Birth, taxes, and death are the big three, but I've added a fourth. Every moment of our waking lives is spent inside of our own skin. That's also a fact about life that's inescapable. So sometimes I remind people of that and I say to them, how's that going for you? How's it going living inside your own skin? Would you like it to be better? Transformation of being. And there are practices and studies that support that. Anyway, I pointed out also last week that if we decide to make the commitment to become better scoundrels, to become the person we want to be before we die, way before we die, to commit to the transformation of our own being so that our own presence in the world is a blessing to other people. Okay? If we take on that task, we quickly realize we are up against it. It is a heroic task because we're up against that conditioned self I'm talking about, which is rooted at the genetic and instinctual level. That's some pretty intense stuff. And if that conditions us in our early adulthood, and we want to move beyond that conditioning, that's the devil in the details we got to deal with. And so last week I said that this week I would tell you how you can make that happen. What are the means by which we overcome that conditioned self so that we can show up in the world as the person we want to be? So I'm going to take the mind to task this morning, which was kind of the point of the Teddy reading this morning. So we're Unitarian Universalists, and I've been a UU a long time, and I know how proud we are of our minds. I mean, let's have an honest moment here. How many of you have ever been at a UU gathering at some point in time, and some scoundrel at the gathering starts talking to another scoundrel next to him like, what is your IQ anyway? Have you never heard that before? I have heard that many times. You really? All right. Well, you're a more humble group than most of the groups I hang with because I hear it. Or you can finish this one. Unitarian Universalism is the thinking person's religion. You've heard that one before too, right? We love our minds. In fact, the reason there was a Unitarian and a Universalist movement is because of the nature of our minds. We took to task the theological notions that didn't make sense to us and no longer suited us. And on the basis of rationality, we formed two new movements. Universal salvation. John Calvin, you are not right. And the unity of God. You Trinitarians, you scoundrels, you're not reading the Bible correctly. So the mind has been the thing for us UUs for a long time. It reminds me of my favorite UU joke. Your ministers have told you UU jokes before, so you may know this. I served a congregation once that had never seemed to hear a UU joke ever. So I had a lot of material they never heard, so I was funny for a while. But there's only so many funny UU jokes, and so I ran out after a while. But here's my favorite. You probably know this, but if you don't, I hope you like it. So there was this little girl sitting on the curb in front of her house, and she was very sad, and she was crying. And an elderly woman walked by, and she noticed the little girl sad and crying sitting on the curb, and she stopped and she said, "Well, little girl, what could make you so sad on such a beautiful day as today?" And the little girl looked up at the woman, and with sniffles she said, "I'm sad because my cat died this morning." And the woman's heart went out to the little girl, and she said, "Little girl, I know it's sad, but be joyful. I'm sure that right now your little kitty is in heaven with Jesus." And the little girl looked at the woman. She wrinkled up her nose. She turned up her lip and she said, "What would Jesus want with a dead cat?" Hadn't heard that one? That's my favorite. That's what we do to religion, folks. We are incredibly rational. We love the mind. But here's the thing about the mind. The mind is nowhere near strong enough to take on the conditioned self. Nowhere near strong enough to do the work necessary for the transformation of our being. And in fact, the mind is actually the weakest aspect of the self that we have. It's just we're very identified with it because it's easy to observe. If I say to you all right now, "What are you thinking?" You'll know like that. If I say to you all right now, "What are you feeling?" That one's going to take a minute. Usually. I feel X, Y, or Z. And then the instinctual life, it just expresses itself. Sometimes you go, "I'm hungry." Self-preservation. "I'm lonely." Instinctual life is saying, "Get with the tribe," etc. So within this conditioned self, there is a structure. And roughly speaking, you can divide it into three categories: the mind, the emotions, and the body, or the instinctual self. And we tend to think that the mind rules over all. And in a certain dimension, it does. It's very good at looking at the empirical world and assessing it and working with it and accomplishing things like science and medicine and technology. It's got its place. But it's a very limited place, and it's not very powerful, at least when you're talking about relative to the conditioned self. And the emotions are more powerful than the mind. If you're a pretty good self-observer, you'll actually see within yourself over time that the way you think about the world isn't a reflection of the world and what you're observing. The way you think about the world is a reflection of how you feel inside. Right? How you feel inside colors the mind's interpretation of its experience. Yes? Right. So the emotions actually rule over the mind. And the instincts rule over the emotions. Why do you feel so sad? because I don't have a place in the tribe anymore. Why are you so angry? Because my partner, my one-on-one connection with whom I need to replicate my gene pool, isn't talking to me. See, the emotions can be traced back to the instincts, and that is the ground of who we are. The instincts are the ground of who we are. The emotions are the next ground, and the mind is last, and it's not very powerful. It is in service to the emotions and the instincts. There's more to be said about that, but that's the gist of it. So, here's the thing. If we want to take on this task of the transformation of being, it can't be done with the mind. You can gather all the information in the world that you want. Odds are very, very good that the next day you're going to be the same scoundrel you were the day before. Because the mind can't tap the instincts and make that change. You need something more powerful. And so it just so happens that the instincts and the emotions have a very intimate relationship with one another. You could think about it like this. When I said, like, why are you so sad? I lost my place in the tribe. Why are you so anxious or angry? Well, my partner's not talking to me. Those are emotional reports of the instinctual life. So I like to talk about the emotional life as the barometer of our instincts. It tells us, how's it going with your instinctual life? I guarantee you, if you're not feeling good about something, there's a problem in one or more areas of your instinctual life. And I guarantee you, if you fix that, your emotions are going to change. And they'll be telling you, we're good now. We're good now. So what we have to do is get past the mind or beneath the mind into the emotions that have this intimate relationship with our instinctual life, which is where the conditioned self ultimately resides. And we need to cultivate emotions and learn to direct them into the instinctual. See, you can reverse engineer that relationship. Through the conscientious development of positive emotionality, you can change your instinctual nature. You can move from hatred to love, and the way you instinctually respond to the world will be different. From selfishness to charity, and the way you respond to the world will be very different. From egotism and its serve me agenda to patience and forgiveness. And you will change the way your instinctual self operates in the world. And this is the genius of the Catholic Church. You know all those virtues the Catholic Church talks about? That's why they talk about them. Now, church doesn't preach about them much, but there is great wisdom in that tradition. Those mystics, those Catholic mystics, especially the medieval mystics, John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, Hildegard of Bingen, they were all over the cultivation of these virtues because they understood if you cultivated those positive virtues, it would change who you are and your instinctual nature would evolve and you would show up transformed in the world. See, there is very, very powerful stuff in these traditions that we tend to think we've grown beyond. One of the things I like to do is dip back into them, find that wisdom, see if it works, and then hold it up for people and say, you might give this a try. Rather than just letting your instincts be a barometer for your instinctual life that drives your conditioned self, what if you learn to pull the brakes on that habit and say, I am going to show up here and intentionally cultivate patience in this situation. I'm going to use this situation to cultivate patience. I'm going to use this situation to cultivate charity. I'm going to use this situation to cultivate forgiveness. You see, every dynamic we have in our lives is an opportunity to do this work. I often go into meetings with people or groups with the intention of showing up in a certain way. And when I can do it, it changes the way I perceive and the way I show up. and I'm a different person. And when I forget, I'm the same old scoundrel I was the day before, darn it. But here is the real key. This is the golden key to this 3-part sermon series. Doesn't mean it's over yet. On the 27th, I'm going to challenge you even more. Okay? The emotional state that is the most powerful and the most important to cultivate is love. It's love. And I know deep in my bones that when I act from a place of love, if I can get there and act from a place of love within me, my instincts aren't what drives me. The conditioned self doesn't rule me. I can feel it within and I can act from it, and I'm a different presence in the world when I can do it. And that's what's behind Rumi's poem. So Rumi has a poem. You might have heard this poem before. Do you all know who Rumi was, I assume? Do you know Rumi's story? We're almost done here, so. Do you all know Rumi's story, though? I want to take a minute and ask. Rumi was a scholar. Rumi was a man of the mind for the first half of his life. And he was very well respected in his community. And along came Shams of Tabriz, a dervish. And if you know the dervishes, they're part of the Sufi order, right? It's the path of love. And so Rumi was a man of the intellect. And along comes Shams, and he meets Shams, and Shams is a dervish within the Sufi order who operates from a place of love. And the two of them met. And from the day that they met, they were inseparable. Because Rumi saw in Shams a presence in the world that Rumi wanted to become. And Shams became Rumi's spiritual guide on the path of love. And it's that transition from being a man of the mind to stepping on the path of love which birthed all of Rumi's poetry. If Rumi had not stepped on the path of love, this poetry would not exist. And in my mind, this poem most encapsulates that fact. Rumi says, "Those who don't feel this love pulling them like a river." Think of that metaphor. Those who don't feel this love pulling them like a river. Those who don't drink dawn like a cup of spring water, or take in sunset like a supper. Those who don't want to change. That's what he means by these people. Those who don't want to change. Let them sleep. Let them sleep. This love is beyond the study of theology. It's not a function of the mind, folks. This love is beyond the study of theology, that old trickery and hypocrisy. If you want to improve your mind that way, sleep on. Sleep on. It's okay. As for me, I've given up on my brain. That's the moment when he met Shams of Tabriz. As for me, I've given up on my brain. I've torn the cloth to shreds and I've thrown it away. If you're not completely naked, wrap your beautiful robe of words around you and sleep. So I'm going to say more about this on the 27th, but I want to end with a couple of thoughts. In Gospel of John, I think it is, where we read, "Those who love know God." Now that encapsulates everything I've said for the last 20 minutes. It doesn't say, "Those who think know God." Although those who think they know God. Those who think. He didn't say those who think know God. Those who love know God. And I could do a whole sermon on this. You got time? You know, I was thinking about this. I do this sometimes. I won't go long. I was thinking about this. Where am I going with this sermon series? I'm going in a number of different places that are all pretty the same. But I was thinking about Unitarian Universalism in particular relative to this sermon series. And this is what I would love to see happen. I would like to see us stop being the thinking person's religion so much and become the religion of lovers. I would like people to quit comparing their IQs at parties and start talking about the emotional quotient. How high is your EQ? You ever see that happen? No. But if we could step on the path of love and let it work at us in a very deep level and change who we are and show up in the world differently, you know what would happen? People would look at you and they'd say, he's different. She's different. That's a Unitarian Universalist. They're different. Right? It's kind of what I'm hoping. I'm hoping when people enter these doors and they sit in our chairs with us, they sit and they look around and they go, this feels different. These people feel different. One of the things I loved about the Christian House of Prayer, man, did they walk their talk. You felt the love oozing from that place when you drove into the parking lot. And you met those people outside those four walls of that abandoned shot, literally shot out the windows with guns, abandoned schoolroom where we had to put our metal chairs together every morning to make it happen. Those people profess love. And when you walked in the place, man, you knew it. You were going to be met with love. And when you met them at the grocery store, they were different. And you could feel the love. That's what I'd love to see happen. I want people to look at you and go, that's different. That's what I want to be. The way Rumi looked at Shams and said, he's different. That's what I want to be. All right. That's a footnote. Call it a footnote. Call it a homily within the sermon. I only got through like 5 words. Those who love know God. And if you're not a God person, interpret. Those who love know what's most important. And those who do not love do not know God. What is a simple discernment tool? Is your spirituality for real? Well, if you love, you do know God. And if you don't know God, you're not for real. For God is love. I go to India on occasion and I do these pilgrimages in southern India, and I go to this ashram in rural India. I could talk a long time about that, but I'm not going to do that to you this morning. But the man who ran that ashram for over 40 years died shortly before I started the pilgrimages, but he was a very powerful force in the ashram. His name was Bede Griffiths, and I love the way Bede talked about our life. Bede would say, when he died, he was like 85, and he was one of these glowing men with the long gray beards, and he wore the saffron robes of the yogis, and he would say in a somewhat frail voice, we come from love. Understand, we come from love. And we return to love. And then he would say, so our task in this world is to remember, because we come from love, we are that love. And we are to live from that love. And that's the summation, I think, of today's sermon. So we take the next step. Now, take this into coffee hour, at least. We take the next step in love. Be that conscientious about how you're showing up in the world. I'm going to take the next step in love. And I'm going to perform my next action with love. And I'm going to speak this next word with love. And I'm going to take the next breath with love. Love, love, love. All you need is love. So, let us go our way, remembering always to make beauty for one another, letting love have jurisdiction, friends. Blessed be.
And now I'll close our service with the last stanza of a poem by Mary Oliver. The poem's called To Begin With, The Sweet Grass. What I loved in the beginning, I think, was mostly myself. Never mind that I had to, since somebody had to. That was many years ago. Since then, I have gone out from my confinements, though with difficulty. I mean, the ones that thought to rule my heart. I cast them out. I put them on the mush pile. They will be nourishment somehow. Everything is nourishment somehow or another. And I have become the child of the clouds and of hope. I have become the friend of the enemy, whoever that is. I have become older, and cherishing what I have learned, I have become younger. And what do I risk to tell you this, which is all I know? Love yourself. Then forget it. Then love the world. Now, please join me in reading together the words that will appear on the screen as we extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.